Well, for more, let's speak to the journalist Richard McColl. He's the presenter of Colombia Calling radio show and joins us now from Bogota. Richard McColl, thanks for joining us here on TRT World. Now, this deadline has passed. What hope is there that they're going to make the next deadline?
Well, at the moment, there's a lot of suspicion that the 20-day limit will not be met. There's a lot going on at the moment behind the scenes, whereas the Farc don't trust the government to fulfill a lot of their promises. And of course, the government have a little trust in the Farc to fulfill their side of the bargain. So at the moment, there's a lot of uncertainty here in Colombia.
And it's worth remembering, of course, Richard, that this peace deal only came about after a second referendum. The first referendum failed, and the people of Colombia didn't want this peace deal to go through. So with the Farc not making their first deadline, they're not giving much hope to those in Colombia who don't want this deal to succeed.
Yeah, so the country is particularly polarized over this. I mean, this is to bring to an end something like 53 years of war. And people must remember that deaths in the armed combat here in Colombia have dropped to their lowest ever ratio in the last 53, 54 years. So something is happening, something we can see a change. And yes, you talk of the plebiscite referendum from September last year. It was a very polarized and only just the yes campaign only just lost out to the no campaign on a very low turnout. Of course, the accords were then pushed through by the president in November 24th to be precise. Of course, the great criticism from various parts of the country and indeed the opposition parties. But we're seeing the fruits of this. I mean, we're seeing the fruits that there are less deaths taking place. Now, if both sides could just conform and comply with the promises that have been made, we can hope for the best.
And Richard, is it just the case that there's a lack of trust between the two sides? Because some of the conditions of this peace deal are quite significant, that some Farc rebels give up their weapons and then pass off into civil society and perhaps join the bureaucracy of the Colombian state. Is that what's holding everything up?
Well, there's a lot of problems at the moment. Of course, Colombia is a huge country, and the geographical diversities found within its borders mean that so much of the country is not really catered to by the state. There's no state presence. So you've got a vacuum now where the Farc has left, where they were the de facto state for more than 5 decades. They've left a vacuum, and the government has failed to move in and secure these areas. So you have the Farc rebels based, those who've demobilized, some 7,000 rebels. You have them based in 26 different zones of transition around the country, but in areas now which the newly formed armed gangs, criminal gangs, which are offshoots of the former right-wing paramilitaries, they've moved into to secure these lucrative trade routes for the illicit drugs, arms, people smuggling. And of course, the Farc, rightly so, are incredibly worried about their security once they hand over their weapons. So in 20 days' time, let's say they hand over the 7,000 odd weapons they are believed to have to the UN, they are worried that there'll be a sort of genocide towards their number. Now, of course, this did happen in the late 1980s and the 1990s when many Farc members moved over to the political wing, which was called the Patriotic Union, and there was a subsequent genocide of so many political actors, and when we're talking in the thousands.
And Richard, finally then, if this deal cannot be agreed in 20 days' time, what chance is there that the Farc may take up arms and we see more bloodshed in Colombia?
Well, I've been down to the Farc regions and I've spoken with Farc members and high-ranking Farc members in a zone of transition. And so long as the secretariat, so the ruling members of the Farc, the guys in charge, so long as they are still convinced and assured that the peace deal can be followed out, then the rank and file of the Farc will follow that. But the longer it takes, the less certainty there is that all of that number will remain in these zones of transition, which will then become zones for rehabilitation and reintegration into society.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Richard McColl, the host of Colombia Calling, thanks for joining us.